Hi, I'm Ken Mingus, Executive Editor at Computer World. I'm here today with the Managing Editor for Features, Val Potter, and our special guest, Mike Elgan, the original digital nomad. Today's topic is the future of work, and that's why we thought it would be perfect to have Mike on board here to talk about this. Mike's been sort of working from anywhere for about 15 years, and given what companies and employees have had to deal with this year or in the last year with the pandemic and the rush to remote work, everybody's been scrambling. Mike, you've been sort of able to figure this out well before the rest of us as to how to do it best. And more importantly, you've got some advice on what companies and workers need to be thinking about going forward. That's what I'm really looking forward to. Tell me real quick, how did you wind up being a self-described digital nomad early on, and what's that been like?
Well, I used to be long ago a regular editor working in an editorial office for many years, and then at some point I went kind of freelance, writing articles on a freelance basis. Found myself working at home, and at some point I had the thought, why am I working at home? Why home? Why not somewhere else? I could be anywhere. And then my wife got an opportunity to get away from her job for 6 weeks. We went on a big trip into Central America, looking at Mayan ruins and things like that. And I worked the whole time, and I realized, wow, this is a revelation. This is really when I started exploring the idea and realized that there was already this concept called the digital nomad and so on. And you mentioned that I learned all the tricks of doing this, both from the remote worker standpoint and also from the company standpoint. But I have to say, I learned it the hard way. So our goal with this entire project is to make sure that everybody can learn what many of us have learned already, but the easy way, learning from our mistakes, and so you don't have to make your own.
You know, it's interesting. You were talking about in the piece that you've written for Computer World on this, that I think this might have been when you were in Central America, coming off a ruin somewhere. You had a column on deadline that had to be filed. And this is going back 10, 15 years ago when Wi-Fi was not common, trying to find Wi-Fi in the middle of nowhere so you could file your column, get your work done on time. And you managed to find a little hotel that had a signal, and you were able to get it done. I mean, clearly that's not what people are dealing with now, but that just gives you an idea of the little things you might not think about.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think to a certain extent, people will find that they may end up dealing with something like that even today. I mean, this was 14 years ago, 15 years ago. But even today, if you go to some of those beautiful places on Earth, the Wi-Fi connectivity is terrible. I mean, my wife and I spent a lot of time in Morocco, for example. Fantastic country, beautiful country. But you can find yourself very easily in a place where internet connectivity is very hard to come by. And so this is all going to change, and we'll talk about this later in the session. But for now, there's sort of a reverse correlation between the pristine beauty of the place and the quality of the internet connectivity.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting as we talk about what's gone on over the last year. I think a lot more people can relate to the little things you don't think about when you're not in the office. Everything's provided for you: heat, light, networking, equipment. And you suddenly find yourself from a home office, or, well, given the lockdowns, most everybody is in a home office now. And it's clear that had the pandemic happened several years ago, maybe 5, 8 years ago, before the infrastructure that we have in place now was actually there, companies might have had a lot harder time getting everybody up and running. It's just interesting that how this has been sort of slowly advancing, and then suddenly in the last year, everybody's suddenly discovered remote work.
That's right. And so there are actually two interesting aspects to the recent surge to remote work, one of which is that suddenly a huge amount of the internet traffic for business is running through consumer networks for various neighborhoods. And so many people are doing it that, yes, you're at home in your home office using your consumer broadband service, but so is your neighbor and everybody else in your neighborhood. So suddenly there's a huge tax on that. In some neighborhoods, that's actually been a problem. The other one is that you have everybody in the house working from home. You may have both spouses. You may have kids that moved in with you, and you may have 3 people or even 4 people all working from home in the same building. So when you work in an office building, there's a lot of care that goes into making sure that random people can't just walk up to your workstation and use your computer, which is already logged in and so on. At home, that is not happening. That physical security dimension is gone. And, we tend to think about the absence of the IT pros, the security pros setting everything up for you. We understand that intuitively. We don't think about the other part, which is just the fact that your systems may not be in a secure location. You may not know who's going into your office.
I was going to say that's probably exacerbated when, and then you're talking about working from home, but then if you're working from anywhere, if you're actually a true digital nomad, that becomes exponentially greater when you're working from whatever, hotel or cafe or whatever you can find, I would imagine.
It's absolutely true. If you are abroad and using an internet connection, you're unlikely to have access to a truly secure internet connection. Best case scenario, you're in an Airbnb using their random internet connection. You don't know where that thing has been. You don't know who else has been using it. I mean, if it's an Airbnb, probably lots of people have been using that connection. And so you don't know if the neighbors are using it. You don't know what's going on with these internet connections. And so that scenario requires more expertise for the company that can share that expertise, and for the employee who needs that expertise. Bottom line, this is going to be one of the themes, is with the remote work and the extremely remote work phenomenon of the near future, of the next year, 2 years, 5 years, the need for training goes way, way up, because you're relying so much more on the decision-making and skill of the employees.
Yeah, it's interesting. What I was going to say is, when you think about the IT help desk, and when you have a problem, no longer is the IT help desk downstairs, down the hall. There are not people who can come in and troubleshoot, whatever problem you've got. So you've got companies that have to struggle not only to keep employees up and running, but the help desk to keep them secure. And you've got training issues. There are a lot of issues that come up when employees are no longer in the office. Val, I know a few years back you had gone to Berlin for a few weeks, and I'm just curious. I mean, that's not quite the same as traveling the world. You were in a sort of a fixed location, but there are issues that come up even when an employee is outside the home base. What kinds of things did do you remember coming across?
Fortunately, I did not have any computer problems, so so that was good. The apartment that we just rented an apartment through Airbnb type place. It was called Wunderflats, which I just love. It came with Wi-Fi, and which again, to your point, we didn't. That was probably, there was it was password protected, but who knows how safe it really was. So I just made sure to always be in our IDG VPN whenever I was online, just for that extra level of security. In terms of getting my work done, and really it was pretty seamless. We are already a distributed team geographically at Computer World. I live in San Francisco most of the time. Ken, you're on the East Coast. We have other people in London and Sweden, elsewhere on the West Coast. So we're already dealing with some of those issues. Probably the most noticeable one, since we don't need to talk constantly all day, every day, and most people don't really for many jobs. And so time zones were a bit of an issue, but not terribly so. I mean, we're already 3 hours apart in one direction nowadays. And when I was in Berlin, we were 5 hours apart in the other direction. I was 5 hours ahead of you instead of 3 hours behind you. And honestly, day to day, it had very little impact on what we needed to do. I can see it could be more of a problem for other teams, and or in situations where you're even more, if I were in Asia, I can see how that would be a bigger burden to overcome. Mike, I don't know if you have any tips for the time.
I do. And then you mentioned the VPN situation, and this is another example of how it's really important to think all of these things through to their conclusion, to the end of what it really means. So you were using VPN from Germany before the big rush to remote work. Okay, well, during this, during 2020, everybody rushed to do remote work at the same time. And you have this situation where everybody's using VPN. A lot more people are using VPN than they used to. So VPN capacity is actually limited. You pay for extra VPN capacity. And so a lot of companies are scrambling to increase their capacity. But then you have a second situation where you have everybody using, like I said before, consumer networks. Well, one of the things that happens if you have if your actual physical internet connection is kind of coming and going, that VPN can turn off, right? It can be off for certain periods of time. So those little kinds of things, you have to realize the implications of so many people on VPN. You have to realize the implications of people using unreliable networks with VPN. So there are lots of these things that really what they call for is more expertise in the company about VPN, and also a lot more awareness among employees about how VPN works and what its limitations are.
Yeah, it's interesting when you talk about, just the most basic thing that any employee that's going to be working remotely or working elsewhere in the world needs is connectivity. And there are obviously parts of the world, sure, if you're in a big city, most big cities, medium-sized city, you can get decent broadband, ideally. But, if you're working somewhere in the field in an area that doesn't have that kind of coverage and where there is no 5G, you have to start thinking about where these employees are going to be based, where they're working, what's available to them. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things you've talked about is the rise of Starlink. Is that actually that's going to happen?
It is already happening, Ken. It's the revolution for internet broadband is much bigger and going to have a much bigger impact than most people think. We've all heard the news recently that Google will be discontinuing its Loon balloon program. Well, this program was about very hard to reach places where they would have these AI controlled balloons that would sort of relay internet connectivity into these remote areas. Well, I think what probably happened is that Google realized, okay, this is just obsolete because the globe within the next 3 to 5 years, the globe will be blanketed with internet connectivity satellites. The leader is Starlink, which is Elon Musk's SpaceX, which is breaking records for launching satellites. They recently launched 140 something satellites out of one rocket. They are the leader. So they're going to be blanketing, they're in beta right now in North America, in the US and Canada. They'll be completely online this year throughout the US. So you'll be able to go to some very remote place with no electricity, no roads, no nothing, and get pretty close to fiber quality speeds at more or less fiber prices. You can't do that on a mobile basis because you need a kind of a permanent satellite dish. But if you live in that area, you can get that. So within 2 to 3 years, we're talking about most of the world will have that capacity. This is a complete revolution. It's not only Starlink, Jeff Bezos's rocket company, all these billionaires have a space program, but Bezos's rocket program is going to have a later and less gigantic version of that. The European Union sees what's happening with Starlink, and they're saying, well, Europe should come out with its own satellite mobile broadband system. Lots of countries and lots of companies are going to be doing that. There's going to be lots and lots and lots of competition in satellite-based internet. And this is happening right now. No doubt there are people, the majority of people watching and listening to this session will at least be considering this because it'll just be another option for mobile broadband. If you're in a big city, like you say, you probably won't opt for it because, again, there are capacity issues. But if you're, even in a medium-sized city, and definitely if you're in a small town, you're gonna love this because it's very fast, very low latency, and it's going to be great for business.
It's interesting. We talk a lot here, or we have talked a lot here about sort of the infrastructure, the most basic things you need, which is connectivity, place to be, access, VPN, hardware. I don't think a lot of companies and employees even have really dealt with the cultural changes that are coming. As we look at work from home becoming work from anywhere, you've got issues with onboarding new employees, pay scale and salaries and how they might be affected, legal issues, tax issues. What kinds, along those lines, what are the kinds of things that companies need to be thinking about right now as they look not only at what's happened, but where we're going in 21, 22, 23, et cetera?
one of the things that we learned during the big rush to remote work is that people have different personalities and that lend themselves to either liking or disliking remote work. Many of the people who really, really wanted to work from home had already been doing so. And so a disproportionate number of the people who would rather not work from home are now working from home. And so there are lots of, to put a name on it, extroverts and introverts. Extroverts need human interaction and it energizes them. And so there are lots and lots of people who feel kind of lost. Maybe they're a little paranoid working from home. Maybe they feel very lonely. Maybe they're feeling depressed. Not everybody, but it does happen. If you have lots of employees, some percentage of them inevitably will have emotional or, you're talking about an employee morale and productivity issue at the bare minimum. And so this, like you say, with the onboarding and with training and so on, with communication systems, all of these have to take into consideration human nature, which is that people really do like those water cooler conversations. Those are extremely valuable when people work together in an office. People feel connected, they feel energized. And so you put everybody into their own home offices and you've got a potential set of problems brewing. So there's a sort of counseling, psychological aspect to it. But there's also a technological issue as well. Everybody rushed to Zoom when the big...
and here we are.
And here we are.
Yeah.
And Zoom, it's great that Zoom was here when we needed it. It's great that the internet connectivity and all the rest was here at the moment we needed it during the big rush. But Zoom is not the solution. Looking at a wall of faces is not natural. It's a little stressful. And so we're going to be looking for more innovation in the space of communication that will enable people to relax, actually communicate, feel connected, and all the rest. It'll be some combination of video, audio, text, and so on. But what we've got today, the best solution does not exist yet. I have a feeling that there is going to be a move toward avatar. This is just an example of what's possible. And I say this as a likely scenario because Apple itself is working on this very aggressively. The idea is that with kind of augmented reality glasses, you see holograms, sort of cartoonish hologram avatars of the people you're interacting with sitting around a table. Psychologically, that's much better because you don't feel like you're on video. You don't feel self-conscious that everyone is looking at you. Not only are people on video on a Zoom call, not only do people see you directly, but you see everybody looking at you, even when somebody else is talking. So with avatars, when somebody else is talking, you see that everybody is looking at that other person, just like a real meeting. Psychologically, this is a happy situation and one that enables you to relax, pay attention, and all the rest. And so that's just one small example of how technology can affect the psychology of working from home when you're trying to do business, trying to communicate, and trying to make people feel connected.
Yeah, it is, as we're on screen now, I get the whole introvert extrovert thing and the fact that there are some people who can thrive in this environment. And I'm sort of in the middle. I'm kind of extroverted introvert. So I'm fine with this, but you do miss the human contact. Yeah. It's also interesting, again, to shift gears to some of the corporate issues that companies have to think about. When I relocated from Rhode Island to North Carolina in 2020, just ahead of the pandemic, suddenly I find myself when I'm going to do my taxes this year, I've got to worry about state taxes in Massachusetts where the company is located, Rhode Island taxes where I used to work, North Carolina taxes where I work now, and federal taxes. And it's a sort of thing that I don't think companies and in particular employees may be prepared for, to realize that they have to be familiar with implications, legal and tax implications wherever their employees are. And as workforces get more distributed, that's only going to have to scale up and get even more complicated.
That's right. A huge number of the digital nomads and many of the people sort of working from home, working remotely, have been consultants or freelancers. Now, when you have a relationship with a consultant freelancer and you're a company, that's one thing. When your full-time employee is remote or abroad, that's an entirely different thing. If you've got employees in 15 different states, then you have to be aware of and follow the law in those 15 states around employee stuff, the legal stuff, the tax stuff. All those things are very impactful financially. you can save or lose a ton of money on taxes if you don't do the taxation right. You can be sued or have some other problem if you don't understand the requirements for each state for all kinds of different aspects of that employee, from a legal perspective, from a requirement in terms of what has to be provided to them. If somebody has a back issue, do you have to provide them a chair? Do they need wheelchair access to their own house? Workers' comp issue. If somebody slips in their own bathroom during work hours, that could be a workers' compensation situation. And so there are all these issues that you may not think about that are going to be you think, oh, well, everybody's going to be working from home. It'll be just like before, except more of it. But that's not the case. It will be different in kind. It will be more complicated, more risky, but there'll also be a lot more upside. So this is the thing that when we talk about the future of work, we're not just talking about remote work and more of it. We're talking about a situation where people realize that they're working from home, they're still living in the city and working in their home, spending a lot of money. And they think, well, why don't we move to a more pleasant, more spacious, less populated, lower cost area and raise our children there because it'll be a better environment since I don't have to go to the office anyway. Or they may think, well, why don't we go really remote, go live in the mountains or something? Or why don't we go live in another country? Why don't we go to Croatia or Barbados or some other country? And employees will make those decisions. You'll also, as a company, want to consider, well, maybe we'll just hire people who already live abroad or in other states. There are financial benefits. There are certainly hiring benefits. It's much easier to hire that specialist if you have the whole world to choose from rather than just finding that specialist living in the commute distance of your office. And so everything changes. Everything becomes much more complex. But for the companies who can build in the flexibility, can invest in the right kinds of technology and transform their management and work culture in the right way, there are enormous upsides to this transformation.
I was just going to ask, just to follow up on that. So, with all of these things to think about, HR issues, salaries, taxes, legal, it's kind of overwhelming for companies that are considering this. So what's the first step towards, making a plan and just getting ready for this new reality? Because I think more and more employees are going to be requesting this. I don't think companies can just put their heads in the sand and say, oh, we're just not going to deal with this.
Oh, you cannot do that. You're going to need the expert. Think about it this way. You're going to need the expertise available to you. And you should immediately put together a small team of people who are expert in these areas. You may need to bring on consultants. You may need to hire people who have this expertise, but we're talking about expertise in out-of-state employee legal situations, international legal situations. What are the tax benefits? What are the best practices for optimizing taxation when you have a significant number of employees abroad? How do you do that? There's actually ways to do that. There are companies that specialize in helping you with your taxes and how you handle your employees and so on. And so that's the very beginning, is you need 3, 4, 5 people who are expert in the bookkeeping aspects of extremely remote work, the HR aspects, the technological aspects, because everything that isn't in the cloud now is going in the cloud. And then you have a security issue with security in the cloud. That's an entirely different thing. And then very importantly is the legal issues. Interestingly, in the United States, we have a lot of expertise in immigration legalities and so on, but we tend to assume that immigration is other people coming to the United States. Now we're going to have lots of Americans going abroad temporarily, maybe even permanently, becoming expats or whatever. And so that kind of expertise is a little harder to come by. So first step is to put together that team, figure out what you need to know, what you need to do, and start to build a plan. And then you can bring in additional leaders within the company to actually start putting together the big plan. Remember that one of the initial products of this is rewritten policies for remote work, for security, for all those things, all the policies you have in place, or even the policies you don't have. You're going to have to build those policies or rewrite the policies you have to take into account this new world of extremely remote employees at a pretty large scale.
Wow, that's great advice, Mike. We could go on for a long, long time on this topic because obviously this is going to evolve. I mean, things like hiring and pay scales and so many things are going to be affected. But I think you make the point that for companies to get ahead of this, they have to have a team that can multitask across a variety of issues as they look ahead. Before I let you go, any last things that we didn't cover here that we want to get out there for people to keep in mind before we call it a day?
Yeah, I just want to emphasize 2 points. One of them is that I just want to recap the basic dynamic that will happen. People will go remote, which means they work from home. Once they're working from home, they realize, why are we at home? They'll want to go somewhere else. They may not want to go somewhere else. And so different types of employees will be remote. Used to be certain types of employees were remote. All the managers and certain types of other people were not remote. Well, those managers are going remote. The HR people may be working from home. So the types of people will change, the scale of it will change, and the distance from the company will change. All those things will change, and there are lots of ramifications for all those things. And the other point I'd like to make is there are great reasons why people are doing this. And if you're not considering a real change in where you live and how you live and where you work, you might want to do that because this is actually an opportunity to live a better life. Even if you end up taking a cut in pay. I remember being shocked when I first went remote. We lived in Greece for a while. I had to give up some of the freelance work that I had because it required me to be in person. And so my income dropped by half and my cost of living dropped to 1/3. So it was as if I got a raise.
Yep.
So think about the economics of this because it may not be what you think. And there are big opportunities to be more flexible in your cost of living if you're going to choose and have the whole world to choose from in terms of living abroad. So consider this lifestyle for yourself and also prepare your company for it.
Yeah, and it seems like for companies too, one thing, and I'll lend it on this, if you've got a big headquarters with lots of empty cubicles and everybody's distributed, do you really need the headquarters? I mean, I think there's going to be a whole lot of evolution in thinking in terms of what work is and where it is and how it's done. Val, I don't want to go before giving you a shot at anything else you might want to add before we call it a day.
Just maybe one final thing for Mike, one final question. So we've talked a lot about what companies need to do to prepare. We've talked about what employees need to do to prepare. What about if you're a manager, like a middle manager, do you have any tips for if you're the manager, either, being abroad yourself or remote yourself or working with employees who are, any sort of concrete tips for, communicating with employees, either in real time or staggered because of the time zone issues? Anything?
Yeah, absolutely. There are lots of ramifications for this, and it'll depend on what you're doing, who is where, and so on. The time zone differences may be a burden because it may be difficult to get everybody together in a single live meeting, or they may be an advantage. You can have people working on some aspects of the project, and by the time the rest of the team wakes up and gets to work, some parts have already been completed and so on. I found that to be true myself as a freelance writer. I could spend 5 hours on something and have it submitted to an editor, and they would have it at 7 o'clock in the morning, something like that, if I'm abroad. The other thing is to realize that your role as a leader and a manager of people is expanding to have a lot more soft components to it. And here's a good analogy, I think. We all know, for example, that email is a tricky medium for conveying anything that has any emotional content. If there's a disagreement or something like that, it's very easy for email to be misinterpreted because when the person writes the email, they're thinking and feeling a certain way, but those bits and bytes of text don't convey any of that. And then the person who receives it is in their own state of mind, and they may receive something other than what that was sent. Well, now take that idea, the absence of physical interaction and proximity, the absence of in-person communication. Now all the communication is kind of like text, kind of like email. You're really lacking that powerful, valuable, being in the same room with somebody, communication that we don't think about too much. And so you need to over communicate, Be very, very specific. Make sure people understand and are getting the message, getting the communication in both directions that you really intend. Because it's going to be much more easy for things to be misinterpreted, for people to not understand. So we all have to become experts in disambiguation. We all need to become experts at saying exactly what we mean and not leaving any room for interpretation. This is a communication style. It's just one of the things we're going to have to do as managers and leaders to deal with the fact that many people are going to be working remote or very, extremely remote.
That's
Great
great advice, Mice. Yeah, it really is. And a lot of solid points all around in terms of what companies have to deal with, what workers have to deal with. Clearly, you've put some thinking into this because you've had to live it, and that kind of first world experience is key. So I want to say thanks for being here and sharing with us. That again, a lot of good advice. Val, also thank you for being here and sharing your real world experience and advice. And I guess I just leave it with this. We talk about the future of work. I'd say the future of work is here now. Anyway, thanks for watching.